In medieval times, feudal lords could legally claim the first night with every peasant bride on their lands. While husbands waited outside, lords entered bridal chambers. This systematic rape system lasted 800 years. Jus Primae Noctis, the right of first night. It was medieval Europe's darkest legal tradition. Feudal lords used this right to legally rape millions of peasant women across centuries of documented horror. Don't forget to hit the like button on this video and write which country you're watching from in the comments. It's very important for more dark history videos like this. The right of first night wasn't just tradition. It was part of written law codified in legal documents that survive today. When the feudal system was established, lords had absolute rights over everything on their lands. This everything included women as literal property. Law books clearly stated, dominus terrae, the landowner has first night rights over his vassals' brides. This wasn't just valid in France, but also in England, Germany, Spain, and throughout the Holy Roman Empire. Peasant families were required to notify their lords of wedding dates weeks in advance. The lord would evaluate the bride's quality beforehand, sometimes conducting physical inspections, and decide whether to exercise his right based on the woman's beauty and age. The most horrific part, this right only applied to peasants and serfs. Noble families' daughters were protected by their social status, but peasant women were used like livestock with no legal protection whatsoever. Legal documents from the period reveal the systematic nature of this exploitation. Courts maintained registries of when lords exercised their rights, treating rape as a routine administrative matter requiring proper documentation. The wedding night horror worked like this. After the wedding ceremony, the peasant couple was brought before the lord in his great hall. While the lord examined the bride from head to toe like inspecting merchandise, the groom had to wait with his head bowed in forced submission. If the lord decided to exercise his right, the bride was taken to the lord's private chamber while still wearing her wedding dress. The groom had to wait outside, sometimes all night long, listening to his wife's screams through the stone walls. The lord's chamber was specially prepared for these encounters. Bed sheets in the lord's heraldic colors, candles arranged ceremonially, wine and food ready, as if it were a romantic encounter rather than legal rape of a terrified child. The bride was usually a 14-16-year-old girl who had never been intimate with any man, scared, crying, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. The lord was typically a 40 to 50-year-old experienced man who viewed her as another possession to be used. The most horrific detail, official documents were kept proving the lord had exercised his right. These certificates served as legal proof that the bride was no longer a virgin, preventing future disputes about the marriage's validity. Village priests were often required to witness these encounters, adding religious authority to the lord's sexual violence. The church justified this practice by claiming lords needed to ensure peasant bloodlines remained pure and under noble control. Some families tried desperate methods to escape this right. The most common method was buying freedom with money. They attempted to pay the lord substantial sums to renounce his right to their daughter's body, but this money often exceeded peasant families' annual income by 3 or 4 times. Most families would go into crushing debt to protect their daughters, then face starvation or eviction when they couldn't repay. Some families resorted to more dramatic methods. They would secretly send their daughters to distant relatives, arrange hasty marriages in other territories, or even flee their lands entirely rather than submit to the lord's desires.
The most tragic method was pre-defloration. Some desperate families would arrange for their daughters' virginity to be taken by village boys beforehand, hoping to reduce the lord's interest. This brought tremendous shame to the family's honor, but seemed preferable to noble rape. Sometimes peasant men would rebel against this system, but the price was always death or brutal punishment. Peasants who dared oppose their lord would be publicly hanged, tortured, or have their entire families expelled from the land with nothing. Historical records document cases where entire villages were burned for protecting a bride from her lord's advances. The message was clear. Resistance meant collective punishment that could destroy hundreds of innocent lives. Women who experienced this system have horrific stories preserved in church confessional records. Most never recovered from the trauma of being raped on what should have been the happiest night of their lives. A woman violated by the Lord on her wedding night would return to her husband the next day, but she was no longer pure in medieval society's eyes. She was broken both physically and psychologically, often bleeding and unable to walk properly. Some women would never speak again after this trauma. Others would cry constantly, have violent nightmares, or develop what medieval physicians called madness of the womb. The disease called melancholy was predominantly seen in victims of noble sexual violence. The most horrific consequence was pregnancy. If the woman became pregnant with the Lord's child, the baby was legally considered the husband's offspring, but everyone in the village knew the truth about its parentage. These children often faced lifelong discrimination and were sometimes killed by their supposed fathers in fits of rage. The genetic evidence of noble rape continued terrorizing families for generations. Village communities looked at these women differently forever after. The stigma of being a woman the Lord touched marked them as permanently contaminated, affecting their children's marriage prospects and social standing. So why did lords exercise this right? It wasn't primarily sexual desire. It was psychological warfare designed to maintain absolute control over peasant populations through sexual humiliation and terror. Lords used this practice to remind peasants of their complete powerlessness. The message was clear. Even your most intimate moments belong to me. Nothing in your life is beyond my reach. Some lords strategically used this right to punish rebellious peasants. Threatening to claim a man's daughter became the ultimate weapon for enforcing obedience and extracting additional labor or crops from resistant families. The most perverted lords used this right systematically, maintaining detailed records like hunting logs. Some would rape 20-30 peasant brides annually, treating sexual violence as entertainment and sport rather than occasional privilege. Professional record keepers documented these encounters in disturbing administrative detail. Palace scribes recorded dates, participants, duration, and the lord's satisfaction levels, treating rape like any other feudal business transaction. The lord's wife usually remained silent about her husband's systematic sexual violence. Noble women understood they were also property with no authority to challenge their husband's behavior, regardless of how morally repugnant. Some lords developed elaborate selection processes, maintaining breeding records of peasant families to identify which girls would mature into the most desirable victims. They tracked bloodlines, physical development, and family histories exactly like livestock management. The enforcement mechanisms created networks of surveillance and betrayal throughout peasant communities. Village leaders were required to report upcoming marriages and assist in bride evaluation, making them complicit in their neighbors' sexual exploitation. Economic implications extended far beyond individual families. Lords leveraged this right in all peasant negotiations. Rent payments, crop yields, labor obligations, and legal disputes could all be influenced by threatening to claim someone's daughter. How did the right of first night finally end? The process took centuries and required massive social upheaval. It officially ended with the French Revolution in 1789, but continued illegally in remote areas until the mid-1800s. The Renaissance brought new concepts of individual rights that gradually undermined feudal sexual privileges. Enlightenment philosophers condemned the practice as barbaric, but change remained extremely slow and geographically uneven. Even official abolition wasn't easy. Some lords organized armed resistance, claiming ancestral rights that predated any government authority. Rural nobles fought desperately to maintain their sexual privileges over peasant women. The right of first night reveals humanity's capacity for systematizing sexual violence through legal and religious justification. This wasn't random brutality. It was carefully organized oppression that operated for 8 centuries. Understanding this history reminds us that human rights are never guaranteed and must be actively defended. The medieval system shows how quickly civilized society can normalize the most horrific practices when power structures support them. If you like this video, don't forget to like, write which country you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more dark history videos that reveal the uncomfortable truths mainstream education ignores.